you have the Wyandot warriors, Roundhead and Walk-in-the-Water, who are actually complete opposites. So Chief Roundhead is fighting with Tecumseh, dies with Tecumseh at the Battle of Thames when supposedly that Kentuckian had killed him. And supposedly actually Tecumseh came from Kentucky. It's a theory. And his father was here. Puck Shinwa came from Kentucky. One of the first people died at Point Pleasant, so, you know, they spilled first blood. Walk-in-the-Water is a Huron chief. He's basically a fucking turncoat Benedict Arnold. He's a piece of shit. So he just keeps on begging to fucking. He offers his service to General William Hall, but he declined because General William Hall of the American forces didn't want to have savages in their fucking forces. Later on, he was forced by circumstances to join the British at Malden, but is instrumental in persuading several tribes to remain neutral in the council. At that place, he vindicated his course in a speech that was called by his enemies American talk. After this, Walk-in-the-Water and his associates openly broke with Tecumseh and the Prophet, declined to remain with the British, deserting from General Henry Procter at Chatham, Canada at the Battle of Thames. He offered his services with those of 60 warriors conditionally to General William Henry Harrison, who declined them. And the Hurons returned to Detroit River. So the Hurons, you know, the fucking these Wyandots, the Roundhead was there to the very fucking end, but Walk-in-the-Water's sitting there begging William Henry Harrison, begging fucking General William Hull to offer his services to the Americans, but they're so fucking racist, they're like, nah, we don't want your services, get out of here. And so, you know, clearly it's just anti-Indian. The Battle of Thames is where Roundhead and Tecumseh would die, and here you have Walk-in-the-Water who's fighting against him. So it's interesting that Walk-in-the-Water and Roundhead had crossed paths at the Battle of Frenchtown, which kills James M. Meade. And he was like one of the first people killed because he was like in a really vulnerable spot. And so the Wyandots had caused, you know, the retaliation, but it had caused the death of James Meade, and that's the namesake of Meade County. The Wyandot people, or Wendat, also called Huron, are indigenous peoples of North America. They traditionally spoke Wendat. I feel like I've kind of talked a little bit about this before. The first Battle of Frenchtown, first Battle of River Raisin. So you got James Winchester, okay, this fucking fat fucking piece of shit. So he's a totalitarian dictator, autocrat, right? Like Julie Chancellor, Adolf Hitler, George Washington, Che Guevara, Lenin, Stalin, Mussolini. So the Army of the Northwest led a column consisting of approximately 1,000 inexperienced regulars and volunteers, most of whom came from Kentucky. Major General William Henry Harrison ordered him to remain within supporting distance of Harrison's column near the Maumee River in present-day Perrysburg, Ohio, about 30 miles south of Frenchtown. Instead, the fucking smart, great genius that James Winchester, the stupid, dumb-foot, fucking fat fuck, piece of shit, James Winchester instead ignored the orders, sent a small relief detachment north to Frenchtown along the River Raisin. That's going to be that's the first battle. Lieutenant Colonel William Lewis is the one who leads these men across the frozen Maumee River and along the coast of Lake Erie to the River Raisin. So frozen Maumee River, they're having to go across. You know, it's so cold now. The fucking river's frozen. And then the force consisted of 667 Kentuckians and about 100 local French-speaking militiamen. So I'm not sure what that means particularly, but Frenchmen. So we have some Frenchmen going back to Frenchtown trying to take it back over, and we have all these Kentuckians, these white English, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. 667. So on January 18th, 1813, Lewis charged across the frozen River Raisin to attack, so another frozen fucking river, to attack the British and Indian camp, which contained 63 soldiers of the Essex militia, accompanied by a 3-pounder cannon and about 200 Potawatomies. So we needed to learn about who the Potawatomies are. Why are we murdering Potawatomies, you know, all the way near fucking Canada? Why are Kentuckians marching all the way up to Detroit to murder a bunch of Potawatomies? A brisk battle took place before the Americans forced the British and their allies to retreat. So the Canadians charged the Americans the line several times, supported by gunfire. The Indians fighting continued sporadically for several hours with Canadians and natives fighting log to log, after which Lewis reclaimed Frenchtown. So, you know, this is for Canadian land. So it's for Indian land, Canadian land. The British and the fucking Americans are trying to fight for the Canadian lands, and Canadians are saying, "No, fuck this is our fucking land." Reynolds' brother commented later how the Essex militia fought most bravely, retired slowly from log to log. Skirmish has been noted as one of the few examples where Canadian militia stood fast without the backing of British regulars during the war. Kentucky rifleman William Atherton's memoirs often gruesome testimony to how adept the Essex men and natives were at bush fighting, stating the fight now became very close and extremely hot. I received a wound in my right shoulder. The moment before Atherton was hit, he witnessed two of his fellow riflemen move too far forward. One was killed and the other wounded. Atherton described perfectly the tactics used by Reynolds and his men. Their method was to retreat rapidly until they were out of sight, which was soon the case in the brushy woods. And while we were advancing, they were preparing to give us another fire, so we were generally under the necessity of firing upon them as they were retreating. Another Kentucky private had similar recollections. As we advanced, they were firing themselves behind logs, trees, etc. to the best advantage. After a long, bloody, and exhaustive withdrawal over 2 miles of woodland, the Canadians and natives slipped away, leaving Frenchtown to the Kentuckians. This skirmish would later be known as the First Battle of the River Raisin, also the First Battle of Frenchtown. During the retreat from Frenchtown, the Native Americans looted the small settlement of Sandy Creek about 2 miles north of the River Raisin, which had been settled in 1780. All 16 houses were burned to the ground. At least 2 of the residents were killed. Sandy Creek was never rebuilt. Okay, so that's the first battle. You have all these Kentuckians who's invading. They're taking over Frenchtown. They kill the Potawatomies. And then now we get Chief Roundhead and we get Walk-in-the-Water coming back. But the first Indians that were there were the Potawatomies. So we got Wyandot who's coming back, leading the revenge killings or the reinforcements. But it was the Potawatomies. So we need to learn about who are the Potawatomies. So that's a good question. And so, the second battle of Frenchtown, the second battle of River Raisin. So, they're occupying for 5 days, and then January 22nd. So, Colonel Henry Procter, who commanded the British forces in the region, quickly gathered all the available troops, approximately 500 regulars, British, and roughly equal number of First Nations warriors under the Wyandot chief Roundhead. So, about 1,000 people. They've got 1,000 men, and they're marching back to Frenchtown to kill the Kentuckians. So the British and the native troops survived the Kentuckians at dawn on January 22nd, which would have been 7 days ago, 201 years ago. They quickly crossed the American right flank, but the left flank, which is barricaded inside the fort, continued to fight. Winchester had meanwhile awakened to the sound of artillery and gunfire, but when he attempted to rejoin his command, he was captured by Chief Roundhead. Winchester promptly surrendered his entire army. So Chief Roundhead fucking surprises Winchester, fucking ambushes him, takes him over, and then he's fucked. He's fucked. He's captured. And then he just gives up the army. Fearing a counterattack by William Henry Harrison, Colonel Procter and his regulars retreated back to Brownstown with their Kentucky prisoners and their own wounded on sleighs, but there were not enough sleighs to take the American wounded who had been left behind under the First Nations Guard. Procter would later claim that he planned to go back for them the following day, but by then the warriors had executed somewhere between 30 to 60 of their charges, many of whom were Kentucky volunteers. The incident soon became known in American newspapers as the River Raisin Massacre. So after they take the town back over, they have all these prisoners of war. They don't want to stay at the fucking town to get attacked again. So instead of carrying the prisoners of war, they kill a shit ton of fucking people. And then they were supposed to cry about that. Oh, fucking poor James M. Meade. He fucking got massacred at the Battle of River Raisin. Well, he got killed at one of the first invasions. So his death is actually, acceptable. But those who died at, the so-called massacre when they murdered the prisoners of war, that was, it was a war crime in today's standards. But those who sit there and say that we need to remember the River Raisin Massacre, well, you're forgetting about the entire fucking invasion. These white Kentuckians march all the way up to Detroit to fucking take over Frenchtown, and then Frenchtown kicks the Kentuckians' ass. So why were you invading, fucking Frenchtown? Why not just stay in Kentucky, raise your little farm, take care of your kids, and fuck all this war shit? 5 days later, the name River Raisin Massacre is used for January 23rd, one day after the surrender, when pro-British Indians murdered dozens of wounded Kentucky volunteers who were due badly injured to march as prisoners. So dozens. They murdered dozens of them, like what, 24 or so. There's like 400 that died of the whole day. It's the bloodiest war, the bloodiest battle in the War of 1812, and the bloodiest battle in Michigan in all time. Following the recapture of Frenchtown, Brigadier General James Winchester and the rest of his troops met with Colonel Lewis 2 days later on January 20th, 1813. Winchester acted without orders, but Harrison was pleased with Lewis's successes. However, Harrison was concerned that British forces might combine and overpower Winchester's small force. He ordered additional men, including 3 companies of 17th Infantry and 1 company of 19th U.S. Infantry, to move to Frenchtown. This is before the final battle. Furthermore, Winchester's planning was poor. Ammunition and other necessary supplies had not been brought forward from the Maumee River. The palisade around the town had not been strengthened, and the regulars of the 17th and 19th U.S. Infantry were camped outside of the walls. So when they be on the inside, like, what the fuck are y'all doing? Several days after the first clash, local residents reported to Winchester that a large British force was headed towards Frenchtown. Winchester ignored their warning, insisting that it would be some days before the British would be ready to do anything. His troops were camped throughout Frenchtown without ensuring that sentries and pickets had been placed. Winchester retired for the night to his headquarters at the Novara House south of the town. So this fucking fat, fucking totalitarian, dictatorial, autocratic piece of shit, this fucking Hitler wannabe killing all these goddamn Indians and shit, he's not even sleeping with the troops. He's not even in the fucking tents and shit. He's like in a fucking mansion, you know, south of the town. And then that's how he gets captured, because he's already isolated. General William Henry Harrison, old Tippecanoe, who's eventually the 9th president of the U.S., Tippecanoe and Tyler too. You know, he was Tippecanoe for leading the army that eventually murders Tecumseh at the Battle of Thames in 1813. So William Henry Harrison's like a big fucking war hero, right? Bloody shirt, sort of like Andrew Jackson and Polk. So James Winchester to hold his ground following the first battle. William Henry Harrison and his troops did not arrive in time to participate in the second battle, and hearing that the Kentuckians had recaptured Frenchtown, Brigadier General Henry Procter, commander of the British forces around Detroit, marched with his troops from Fort Malden and crossed the Detroit River from Upper Canada, invading Michigan in strength. Henry Procter's army consisted of 597 regulars from the 31st Regiment of the Foot and Royal Newfoundland Fencibles, joined by about 800 Indians. So this saying that there's about 1,400 of them. Tecumseh was in the area, but he wasn't present at the Battle of Frenchtown. He left command of the Native Americans to the Wyandot chiefs, Roundhead and Walk-in-the-Water. So Roundhead is loyal to Tecumseh to the very bitter end, and Walk-in-the-Water is a fucking turncoat Benedict Arnold piece of shit. Why he actually participated in this battle, I have no idea why. The Indians included Shawnee, Potawatomies, Ottawa, Chippawa, Delaware, Miami, Winnebago, Creek, Sauk, and Fox tribes. And we should know about all these tribes. These are all the Indians that in one major big confederation, you know, talk about nationalist uprising. They were all these different tribes until the white people got there. Then all of a sudden they're Indians, right? They're Native Americans. They're all Tecumseh's men. So let's repeat what they were. They're the Shawnee. This is there was 200 Potawatomies were the ones that were there to begin with, but they get a war with the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Ottawa, Chippawa, Delaware, Miami, Winnebago, Creek, Sauk, and Fox tribes. Procter's artillery consisted of 6 light 3-pounder cannons drawn on sleds manned by men from the Canadian Provincial Marine. Procter halted about 5 miles north of the River Raisin to prepare for battle on January 21st. Procter surprised the American forces before sunrise on January 22nd. A Canadian volunteer, John Richardson, who marched with the 41st Regiment of Foot, later wrote, "On the 22nd, before daybreak came within sight of the enemy, such was their security and negligence that our line was actually half formed within musket shot of their defenses before they were even aware of our presence. The American regulars only stood for 20 minutes. These 4 companies of regular infantry, consisting mostly of green recruits, were caught in the open, faced with heavy musket volleys to the front, while under direct round shot and canister fire from the 6 3-pounders and being flanked by the Essex militia and natives, they broke and fled. General Winchester was awakened by the roar of artillery fire and rushed to the battlefield, sending 240 men from the 1st Kentucky Rifle Regiment along with Colonel John Allen, to reinforce the regulars. It was to no avail. Under fire from three sides, the American troops fell into a headlong retreat towards Ohio. They attempted to rally three separate times, but were eventually surrounded on a narrow road. Nearly 220 of the 400 Americans had been killed, many of them shot, tomahawked, and scalped during their withdrawal. 147, including Winchester, captured by natives and Canadian militia. On the way, Chief Roundhead stripped him of his uniform before handing him to the British, which led to the legend that he was captured in his nightshirt.